morning, everyone. We're here at the Evil Shenanigans World Headquarters and Training Center once again, and Dr. Rose and I will be forging a couple of knives. So I made this one a while back for my wife, Mrs. Shenanigans. And what I like about it is, number one, it doesn't take up a whole bunch of steel. I like it fits really nicely in the palm of your hand, so it makes it like a good everyday carry knife, which is what she uses it for. And so we're going to start with 3/4 inch round stock. This is a W1 series steel. The W stands for water quench, but when you're forging it down this thin, you don't really want to quench it in water anyway, because the risk of cracking it or breaking it or whatever is much higher. So this morning I kind of started this off a little bit, put a little bit of a taper so that it'll fit in our tongs and be easier to control. So I'm going to work on one, kind of demonstrate the technique, and then James is going to follow along and we're going to try to make a pair of them. This is probably going to take multiple videos. So today, hopefully we can get the blade shape drawn out. Maybe next time we'll start punching the hole. If you want to punch a hole in yours, I think it's pretty fun. It makes it kind of neat. I really like the finger grippy thing on there. Anyways, we'll get that out of the way. So our forge is up. So a lot of times people will ask, is it better to forge your knife or is it better to do stock removal? I know you predominantly have done stock removal so far. Really, there's not a big advantage to doing the forging over stock removal. If anything, you're more likely to blow the heat way out of where it should be when you're doing forging. You get your grain structure way too big. One of the advantages, though, is there's a lot less waste, because you're going to forge the shape as close as possible to your final product, so you don't waste a lot of that. I prefer to do the forging just because I think it's fun. But if you're not set up to do it, you can basically buy a flat stock like you've been doing. It's more or less
to the thickness you want.
The thickness, the length, the shape, all that kind of stuff, and then you just grind it. But there's a little more waste that way. Anyway, we'll let this get up to temperature and we'll get started. So our last video, we made those hooks. It was out of mild steel. This is, of course, a high carbon steel, and it's going to be much more sensitive to temperature. So you've got to keep the heat up. Once it gets to kind of a dull red, you'll notice it's much harder to hit. You're going to get a lot more bounce off of it. That's too cold. So just heat it back up. If you work it too cold, you run the risk of putting stress fractures in the steel, and you'll have little bitty cracks over that entire blade. So you got to work it hot.
Is there a certain amount of time that you're leaving that right now?
We're basically looking for kind of a bright orange color across the entire workpiece, or at least in the section you're going to be working. It's small enough, you can pretty well heat the whole thing up. Our main goal on this first few heats is pretty well just going to be getting it flattened out. And we may want to start at the end where the tip's going to be, try to shape it a little bit. If you can, the more you can do as you go, the better off. You don't want to get it all flat and then try to put in your taper, for your tip, because it's narrow, thin and tall. It'll be real easy for it to kind of want to roll. Okay. So little gradual steps. I'll see where we are now. Now we're still too cold. Here, I'll show you though. See, we're starting to get a little bit of color. That's way too cold to be working in, trying to hammer it. So now putting that brick in front of there just to kind of help seal it up and hold the heat in. It's just wasting less fuel that way. You can leave your forge open, but you're heating up the whole world instead of just the inside. Might have been smart if we'd have done this earlier. Right. It's our second. Right, exactly. lot of standing around waiting. It's a really entertaining video. Anyway, so this hammer, I didn't hear you last time. This is an Alex Steel 3.5 pound rounding hammer. So this side is domed, so it helps kind of concentrate your force, move that metal a little faster. This side is flat, but you notice it's got a nice radius all the way around it. Like a hammer you buy from, say, Harbor Freight or something like that. This is one of the main differences. That edge isn't really radiused very well. So if you're off just a little bit, you'll put really, really deep forge marks in your workpiece. And I actually even radiused this one a little bit.
I'll say, yeah, you can take those hammers that you buy from Harbor Freight. You don't actually have to have an expensive forging hammer. You can buy just a simple ball peen hammer from any hardware store and radius the edge enough to where it's not going to mar the piece of metal as you're striping.
This one I haven't radiused. Not that I do a lot of forging with this little bitty guy, but you can see if you get off just a little bit, you're gonna put a deep, deep gouge in your workpiece. From my experience, depending on how hard you've hit it, for every miss hit, it takes probably 5 or 6 hits to fix that. A couple other things, I don't recommend wearing a glove on your hammer hand. You're gonna get blisters and junk, that's okay. But if you've got a glove on, you pretty well gotta put a death grip on the hammer to be able to control it. And you're gonna injure this whole area. You're gonna get tennis elbow, basically. Except it's not tennis elbow. It's blacksmithing elbow. Which is, All right, so we're coming up pretty good at the temperature now. Alright, so you can see we've got that kind of bright orange color. Alright, so we're going to start with the round side of the hammer. Close side of the anvil towards you, kind of half on, half off. To really focus that energy. You want to work both sides. Alright, now we're down to kind of a dullish orange, and I'm feeling it, the rebound much more off of the metal, off the workpiece. So it's time to put it back in. Well, that's not hard.
Too far in there.
Yeah, I can't really get a grip on it. Alright, so this one's yours.
And I'm left-handed, so I'm going to do everything backwards.
Okay, here, set that back down. Alright, so you're going from round, trying to get to flat, and a good way to judge your thickness and your evenness is to look at this line right here. And you can use that as a guide to show, basically you're trying to match this section here, work that line to where it's a straight line, fairly straight anyway. And that'll more or less be a good indicator of where your thickness is in your workpiece. All right, yeah, you're down to temperature.
Piece of safe hanging down there.
when you get in this color range here, you're not really moving it that much anymore, but you can with lighter taps kind of planish that steel and smooth it out some. Because you're going to have hammer marks in it, but you don't want to hit it real hard when it's in that color range. Like I said, you'll get those stress cracks. All right, you're good to go, James. Unfortunately, it's going to lose the heat pretty quick.
Is there anything to reduce that, or is it just a natural effect?
It's just the way it is. Because you basically got a pretty small piece of metal overall, and then you're laying it up against a great big piece of metal. And so those two pieces want to try to even out the temperature between the two of them, so that sucks up a lot of that heat relatively quickly.
Because when you see videos online of people using a power hammer, the inertia from it, the piece stays hotter longer because of the force.
They're usually working bigger stock using a power hammer. Like that's probably, I mean, you can do it on a power hammer, that's fine, but the larger stock, once it gets up to temperature, is going to hold that temperature a lot longer than the smaller stuff we're working with. Doing it by hand, on an anvil, by hammer, by hand, oh, there it is. 7/8 inch diameter or 1 inch is about as big as you're going to want to do it. Anything beyond that, it's a lot more effort.
That's what we use to make the machete with.
Yeah, and we used a sledgehammer and a striker, so it didn't kill one of us, and it was still a lot.
It was still a lot. Yes.
That's a pretty good sized chunk of metal. This is a farrier's anvil, so it's a little smaller than probably what you would normally see for a lot of bladesmiths. So it's only about 75 pounds. The larger the anvil you have, the more mass underneath it, the more efficient your work is going to be. So it returns that energy much better. I like this one quite a bit. It was in the price range I could afford, and I like it has some bending jigs and stuff already on it. So for using it, just for bladesmithing, maybe it's not the best anvil in the world, but doing general blacksmithing on it as well, it's pretty versatile. That's why I kind of enjoy that one. All right. Okay, so brushing it off, you build up forge scale when it's in there heating up. It's basically just the outer layer of the metal oxidizing. And you want to try to get that off there as much as you can. That forge scale is much harder than your anvil or your hammer or your workpiece. And if you leave it on there and build it up, all you're doing is driving it down into that metal, and it makes it much harder to get it off there. All right, you're good. You end up with really deep pits in your metal if you don't clean it fairly often. If you want to go for like the the rough forge look on your knife, like up on the flats and on the Picasso area, you can kind of leave that on there somewhere. Nice slow, even hits. Watch that line. Yeah, it's going to do it fairly quick.
It's like playing Operation.
Yeah. Except it's 1500 degrees instead of a blizzard.
Yeah. Stakes are a little higher.
Alright, so I think on this heat, I'm probably going to start working on my tip just a little bit. Alright, so we're sanding it up on edge. Lifting the backside up off of the work surface, scooting out towards the far edge of the anvil. Hammer it down. Now steel is not compressible. You are not compressing that steel. You're moving it. So if you notice, when you flatten it down this way, it goes out that way. It's got to go somewhere. So when you start working that tip, you get your angle set, and you're going to have to flatten it back out. The sooner you start that, the easier it's going to be on you. And the one thing you're going to have to watch for is when you're going from relatively thick to hammering it down thin on the end. Just like I just showed you, it's got to go somewhere, so it's going to roll, and you'll end up with like fish lips on the end of your workpiece. So the earlier you can start addressing that, the better off you're going to be. Good to go.
No, I still need to work on the.
You need to go a little thinner before you start worrying about that. Show you something. So this is a perfect example. All right, so this is our thinnest point here.
Right.
So that top line is way out like this. When you watch it, it fades in, and there's a decided curve right here. So this is the thickest piece of your metal
I
steel.
need to move this part out.
So yeah, you want to try to go as even as possible. And what I found helps me is, you know, I just said it, and then I just said it to you, like on this heat, let's do this.
Right.
Really, if you slow down and think about on this hammer hit, I'm going to do this. And think of it in terms of 1 or 2 hammer hits at a time instead of an entire heat.
See, now that makes sense. Keeping it simple. Again, I'm not good at operation.
got it up to really high heat and it's glowing really bright, it's really hard for you to see what the surface area is looking like. So that's why it's actually a little easier to do some of your finishing, some of your planishing when it is down at lower temperature so you can see it. Just don't get carried away and hit it super hard. Just little taps. You're just kind of taking the edge, the highest points off from your hammer marks. Okay, you're good. The good thing is once you start getting it thinner, it'll build that heat back up real fast and we don't have to wait too long. That's okay. That's why I turned the front burner on. If you look at the tip of it though,
yes,
you'll see what I was talking about. It's starting to fish lip.
I see that.
So on your next couple, go ahead and let's start working on your tip.
Oh, okay, work on the tip then.
And let's get that a little bit closer.
Fish lip.
It's basically there's a valley running down the center of it. Right here, there's a low spot. So both the edges are higher. It's kind of hard to see, and I'm probably not showing up very well on camera. That's kind of what I was referring to. But it's not in bad shape, so it's totally fine to press it down. Piece around. As you can tell in the middle, I've got it, it's still really thick, so I'm going to work on trying to even this out some more. Ooh, that is warm. Okay, you're good.
So let's work on getting this flatter.
Now, I would go ahead and start on your tip right now.
Okay, so at an angle.
So pick it up.
Like this.
Yep, scoot it towards the outside edge,
Like this.
towards me, your
Okay.
far edge away from you,
Okay.
and start working that angle down.
This.
Yep. Now you can roll it and work both sides of it.
Just kind of flip it.
Yep.
And roll it the opposite way.
Nope. Put it just like you had it. Scoot it out towards me. Now work the flats.
Sorry, I'm losing my tongs.
Mostly concentrate up here on the tip because you just thicken that tip up quite a bit. That's looking good. Now, if you end up with the fish lips in there, and that's just the way it's going to be, it's not the end of the world. All you got to do is grind them off. We're about to go up speed. How you feeling?
Middle-aged.
A little more effort
It is.
than stock.
A lot more effort to stock. This is definitely a lot more fun.
I like doing it this way, and I'll be honest, that's mainly why I do this one.
See, and if I had the space, I think space is an issue for a lot of people too.
Yeah.
If you can only do stock roll because you've got a small work area, hey,
It's like I said though, it's a good alternative. It's not going to be, a huge advantage to your blade's going to be stronger when you forge it.
right. Metal's metal. And
Pretty
it's all
much.
the same property.
I mean, and we learned in some of our experimentation, it's super easy to blow that grain structure out anyway,
Yes.
and that makes for weaker knives. I think everybody who makes blades is constantly learning and constantly refining that technique. I mean, we just kind of learned a little bit better way to do our thermal cycles, which we'll get in the heat treat. If everybody's interested in going that far, we'll get in the heat treatment process, in later videos. When we get there, we'll talk a little more in depth about it. All right, let's see where Han's at. Okay. All right, so one important thing is you need tongs to fit your workpiece. Having hot metal flying around is no fun for anybody. So you want to have good control of that, a good tight grip, because honestly, you want to hit this as hard as you can and be controlled. So when you start hammering on your piece of metal, it's probably going to bend and you'll have an arc to it. The best way to take it out is scoot it off your anvil, scoot your tongs off of your anvil and put as much of that workpiece on the anvil as possible. You want the bow pointed up and then just work it down on the anvil. Real lightly, work it back out flat. It doesn't have to be perfect at this point in time. Straight-ish is good enough. Okay, so same thing, you're just working it, trying to get it even back out. Periodically work on your tip some. You may start there and then start planching it.
I feel like I need this bit here where it's too thick.
Nice, slow, steady, methodical. Scoot in towards the anvil. Angle yourself kind of like this. So you're not swinging that hammer out like that.
Gotcha.
You're looking pretty good. It's nice and even.
It's a little, the bow.
Right, so, like I said, mostly at this point in time, you want it straight enough that it will go back in the forge fairly easily, and you're not having to, chase it all over the place. It doesn't have to be perfect right now. All right. So on our example, since the back of the handle is rounded, so it fits in your palm, I'm going to go ahead and start rounding that back side. Kind of just like you do a tip, you're just working that corner. You just don't have to go near as drastic. It's got like little devil horn right there.
Oh, yeah.
That's effectively a much more exaggerated version of that fish lips I was talking about. You know, and I said, you got one in there, it's fine. You just hit it with a rasp or your grinder or whatever, it's no big deal. If you were to just fold that over, then you will have what's known as a cold shut, which means you folded metal over on top of itself, but it wasn't up to temperature to forge weld it. So you have cold by temperature shut that in, which on the very end like that's not a big deal. If it's up here, you know, on a critical juncture of the knife, that's a big deal. It's a break point basically. All right, so we're going to work on the tip a little more. There you
So in this, I'm seeing where.
go. Just work your tip a little bit.
Okay.
Get that set in or angle. And really focus there. Scoot it this way. You're scooting it towards the far side away from you so you can get your hammer down on it. Don't go quite so far, you'll get it. Alright, now flatten that tip back out. You're about to lose it. Yeah, there you go. Let's come along. Let's get the beads. So what you did right there was exactly right. I don't know if everybody saw that, but I see James was losing grip. His tongs would work down like to there. And so the way to reestablish your grip on a hot piece of metal is just to pin it to the handle with your hammer and then just reset your tongs. No big deal. Good job, dude.
Thank you.
Alright, so I'm gonna work on my tip too. Starting to look a little more knife shape. But you can see we're still like way too thick for where we want to be. This needs to be a really thin knife. We don't want to go too thin before we heat treat. Yep.
Still put this on the tip.
Yeah, let me loosen that up. Alright, go for it. So you've got a pretty good tip shape in there. So now let's just focus on trying to get it thin and work it nice and even across the whole workpiece.
Where you're at on there, but
Okay, so yeah, same deal with me. I've got the tip formed in fairly nicely. So now it's just time to start getting it thinned out. Moving right along. I typically will leave my tangs a little thicker just because it adds a little weight in your hands to counterbalance the blade length. It may provide some challenges when it comes time to put the handle on because everything's kind of sloped. So if you're off a little bit, you know, your fitment might be an issue, but nothing you can't solve with the router. I think it's looking good, man.
I'm not hitting it hard enough.
It's just kind of, it's just one of those things, the more you practice at it, the better you'll be at it, like anything else. You know, this is, in a way, this is your first knife that you're ever going to forge, or that you ever have forged, rather.
By myself.
By yourself. We worked on that big machete together, and that was a whole different beast, you know. It just, there's some tricks to it, man. That's coming along pretty nicely. Alright, let's let it build up some heat. We're going to have to splice it anyway, might as well cut it. looking good. So one thing you want to look at here real quick, because we're going to try to go for width.
Okay.
Because we're getting a lot of length out of this piece, but not a lot of width yet. So when you're hammering, work down one edge, not to the extent like you're putting bevels on, but just basically one side of your workpiece. Work down the other side of that workpiece, and then come right down the middle. Maybe with more force than you were using on the edges, and it'll squish it out sideways.
Okay.
That seems to be the best way I've found, by hand at least, to get a little more width out of this. Of course, we can forge bevels in. It'll be a little tricky on this smaller knife because we're going to punch a hole.
Right.
You don't want to have bevels around that hole. It'll make it hard to punch that hole. Right, there you go.
So I still need to work on flat.
Yeah, you've got way too much thickness. Here, flip it. Get the majority of this. All right, go for it. Switched hammers. This is a 3.5 pound hammer, and this one is 3. And you would not think that a ½ pound would make that much difference, but it's a big difference. So we were looking, and he was having to choke way up on here and losing a lot of force. So a little bit lighter hammer, that way you can still be out on it and get more impact, I think is going to work. It'll kind of even it out. And we were also talking, like this one is not even 2 pounds. It's too light to generate the same amount of force. You know, with that one being comfortable, you have to be way out here and swinging it over your head like a maniac. You're just wearing yourself out. The main goal is to let your tools do the work and just kind of, you know, minimal effort from you. You're kind of guiding it and letting it fall. And you can, if you're standing up closer to the anvil, it's less strain up here. You're not way out. So you're up here, and you can kind of even get your body in and just let that momentum. Okay. You know, it's a weird balance, but alright, so I'm basically trying to widen my workpiece out too. So I've got it pretty wide out on the tip, there towards the middle. It's a little thinner, so I'm going to do that same thing. Work on this side. You'll notice it curves off to that way. And work the opposite side. Right down the middle. And kind of smooth it back out. starts getting flat, you build up forward skill a lot faster. I think it has to do something with there's more surface area. Save your knuckles. We burned all the hair off his hand yesterday. Thursday, I guess.
Thursday.
We quenched the knife over here. There was a bit of a fireball.
It wasn't the flame, it was the smoke that got me. I inhaled a bunch of that oil.
So I'm starting to get a pretty good bow in it. So I'm going to stand it up on edge. And work it back down. Because I want the spine side, because obviously this is now the spine side. I found sometimes when I forge a tip in, that changes it. I screw it up. So I want that to be nice and straight. The top of the blade, the top of the handle is all in a perfect line. We may curve that handle down or whatever, but you want to start off with it pretty straight. All right, you're back up to heat. Are you guys okay to keep going, or?
A little bit.
Do you have any questions? You'd asked about the hammer when we were off. So ask your question.
Is it still significant which side of the hammer you're using?
Yeah, at this point, so on this one, we're still using the dome side because we're trying to move metal relatively quickly. The flat side, I like to use it for, smoothing things back out, maybe doing some of the bevel work if we start forging bevels. The hammer James is using is pretty already shaped like that. It's already domed. So effectively, we're using the same thing. So I'm still basically using that line that's on that workpiece as that guide to show me where my thickness is. Down on the flats, you'll see it basically curve in that line. It's thicker right in that spot. So you hammer it and try to get that line as smooth as possible. And that's a pretty fair way of indicating you've got uniform thickness. Only like 85% humidity in here. I don't know why I'm sweating. and I've still got a lot of thickness back here in the tang area to try to even out. So I'm going to work on that a little bit first, and then I'm going to set the drop where the like your fingers will fit in there. So I'm going to flip mine around and work the other side some. You're going with the correct hand?
No.
Okay. So I think for now, let's go ahead and let's go to a stopping point. I may work on mine just a brief. Let me take this last heat, I guess. So let's pull yours out. So I've already got heat in mine. I'll work it. And we'll just call it a day on this episode. So I'm going to take mine right here. That's about where I want the handle to start. So I'm just going to start driving that finger wheel down. And then smooth it back out. So on our next episode, we'll work on kind of evening out this thickness, defining that little area right there a little more, and then just kind of refining the overall shape. And then we'll figure out, kind of lay out where we're going to punch our finger hole, and then we'll work on punching the hole. So, all right, well, thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you basically when we've recovered enough to do this again. Bye.
Thank you.